Then There's California, a podcast featuring members of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus in conversation about their lives, legislative priorities, policies, and other related issues that help make California exceptional. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. Rhiannon Giddens, the acclaimed multiracial, multi-award-winning gospel and bluegrass singer, recently posted on social media, "I hate that we need something called Black History Month. I hate that it's the shortest month of the year. I hate that in the past it has been the only time people have talked about black people in history. And I do hope that year-round focus is increasing, and hopefully soon this will be a relic of the past." Well, notwithstanding Ms. Giddens' legitimate frustrations and sentiments, Black History Month, which was established more than 50 years ago as an opportunity for all of us to be reminded or reawoken to learn about, to understand and celebrate black stories and uplift black voices and spotlight those who have made a difference in our collective culture and history, it's hardly a relic. More importantly, it's said that Black History Month is an opportunity to spotlight and celebrate the achievements that African Americans have accomplished in this country, despite the past history and present-day reminders of racism and oppression that affect the community. The theme of Black History Month 2023 is Black Resistance, recognizing African American resistance to historic oppression in pursuit of self-determination and equality. And what a relevant and appropriate time for this theme, considering what 2023 is showing us now. On this edition of Then There's California, we'll talk about Black History Month 2023, the celebrations of the black community's self-determination and equality in the midst of that present-day oppression and slow-to-change racial bias in our culture, in our streets, in our workplaces, and in the world around us. State Senator Stephen Bradford represents California's 35th Senate District in Southern California, including his hometown of Gardena. He is the former chair and now vice chair of the Legislative Black Caucus. And before he was elected to the legislature as an assembly member in 2009 and then to the Senate in 2017, Senator Bradford was the first African American elected to the Gardena City Council. He is the new chair this session of the Senate Energy, Utilities, and Communications Committee, a legislative appointee of the California Reparations Task Force, and the driving force behind the Gardena Jazz Festival. Senator Bradford has joined us on this podcast before in some truly profound cycles in this state's and country's recent history, and we're glad to have him back at what is really no less a profound and sobering time, and yet also a hopeful time. Senator Bradford, good to have you back.
Thank you for having me.
I keep forgetting. I want to talk to you about jazz and the Jazz Festival. It's quite an extraordinary event that you have down there.
It'll be 20 years this August.
And I know we've all heard of the Playboy Jazz Festival. We've heard of the Monterey Jazz Festival. Even Sacramento has some formation of a jazz festival even after all these years. Mm-hmm. Tell us about what makes Gardena's Jazz Festival unique.
Because it's community-oriented. It was started at a time when Gardena was on the brink of bankruptcy. It had no money. And we were, kicking it around on what could we do to kind of like unify the community and add something at a time when the city didn't have any resources. And childhood friends of mine, we all grew up playing music. We just said, hey, let's do a festival. And it was free to the public. And it was free to the public for the first 5 years until year 5. We had over 10,000 people at the park. It was too many to control, so we had to put up a fence the next year and charge a whopping $10. And people almost lost their mind that it was free, now you're charging. But it's still one of the best events you can find. We have international talent, musicians from all around the world. It's like a big family reunion. That's what many of my friends who attended, the residents in the neighborhood, even folks who have moved out of Gardena, they said this is our reunion every year. So it's folks come all across the country to come back for this event.
That's great. Yeah. Someone recently wrote about you that in so many arenas of the world that you touch, whether it's reparations or addressing police misconduct and racism, keeping California mindful of history and how it unfolds even in current times, that you are doing what many didn't believe possible. Is that a fair complimentary assessment of you?
I accept it. I truly agree that many times folks ascend to elected office and they're more caught up in holding the position than doing the work. I'm a firm believer in doing the work. I understand that you only have a short shelf life in this world now with term limits, so it was my intentions to be as impactful and deliberate as I can in the legislation that I author and champion. So I'm hoping it's having an impact.
Well, there's a lot to talk about here in Black History Month 2023 as we get into it. I mentioned Rhiannon Giddens, speaking of music. She's an acclaimed multiracial gospel and bluegrass singer, and she shared these frustrations on social media about the annual celebration of Black History Month. Do you agree with her? Why are we doing it just this month?
It's a lot of truth to that. You don't have White History Month because we've whitewashed history since the beginning of time, and we've all but tried to negate the contributions of African Americans. If we truly were honest about the contributions, we'd be talking about it every day. We wouldn't need a month because Black history is American history. This country would not be here if it wasn't not for the contributions of African Americans. So it's somewhat insulting to say that you need a month to recognize all the litany of contributions that we have made, because again, if you looked at it in its totality, we impact this country every day. Since our early arrival, we've been having tremendous impact. So I understand the frustration there. We shouldn't be talking about it. So what you see in southern states now, all but trying to eliminate African-American history altogether, just shows you the continuation of who this country is. And it has denied African-Americans their true place in this country. So I understand our frustration.
And so, in fact, it's not a relic. It's still relevant during this
very
time.
much relevant that we tell the stories and make sure people understand. I mean, we need to educate, and what we do in America is miseducate folks. And I think we need to talk about this every day.
The theme for this year's Black History Month is Black resistance, and it was chosen in part because of the current politically charged environment around race. Seems like a timely theme, of course, especially this year. From your perspective, what does Black resistance mean to the community, to leaders here in 2023?
I've got to be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of resistance. I would have preferred empowerment, achievement, enlightenment. But I understand the frustration there, and I understand the intent of resistance, because we are faced against a multitude of challenges every day, and we're constantly putting up a fight to overcome those things. So it's timely, it's needed, but I know some folks have bristled a little bit at resistance because it seems, like police resistance, that we're failing to comply or get along, and that's the farthest thing from the truth. We want to be a part of this American society, this fabric of this country, and so I guess we're resisting the racial tenets that have existed for far so long in the oppression.
Well, in fact, we didn't get too much into 2023 before we were confronted with another senseless death of a young Black man at the hands of law enforcement. And in this case, Tyree Nichols, who died after he was brutalized during a traffic stop at the hands of some Memphis officers, reminding us all, even after the cataclysmic protests and the promises of change, police officers are still beating up on young Black men.
So true. I mean, I challenge anyone to show me where you see white individuals being treated in the same fashion. There's never been a video of any sort of, at least not to that magnitude that I can recall. And why is it only African Americans all the time? African American males who are doing no more than trying to get home or to or from work, and they wind up being brutalized for just unnecessary reasons. It's sad that here we are in 2023, and we've seen this movie before, whether you talk about Rodney King, Eric Gardner, Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, it's on, and the only common thread is they're African Americans.
And thank God for body cam footage and other videos of other cameras.
And
Otherwise, we would
cell phones and everything. Yeah, I mean, because we would not know the truth had it not been for technology today.
Did you watch the video?
I've watched it in segments, yes I have.
Because there's some in the community having this debate about whether we have a civic duty to watch it or a moral obligation to not watch it, that it might be exploiting Black trauma.
I think it's for our non-African American brothers and sisters to view it, because far too often, since I was a little kid growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood, when you heard about situations with police encounters with African Americans, the first response, oh, they must have done something. Police do not behave like this on the natural. They must have done something to provoke that. And we always said, no, they weren't. This is how we're treated all the time. So now America can see how the majority of African Americans are treated on random police stops throughout this country. And individuals who are not committing crimes, just simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or just encountering an officer that's having a bad day and they choose to take it out for. So I want those so-called allies to watch this footage, because I think they're the ones who need to see how brutally African Americans are treated sometimes when they encounter law enforcement.
The footage is just visceral. I mean, I watched it too. It's visceral, it's angering, it's heartbreaking. Tyree called for his mother. He said he wanted to go home. Yes, George Floyd called for his mother. And it makes you think of their mourning, weeping mothers and their families. I flashed on Emmett Till and his mother. But just the visceral, personal terror in these videos.
It's real. I mean, and it's heartbreaking for especially African Americans in this country because, again, we've seen it before, and it's just a shame that we're still dealing with it. And like you say, mothers who... I remember having a committee hearing when I was in the assembly with Boys and Men of Color, and we had a police chief who was testifying before the committee. And we were talking about some of the challenges as a law enforcement officer. And he says, the toughest day for me was when my son turned 16 and I had to have the talk. This police chief happened to be African American. And he says, I had to have a talk that my white colleagues don't have to have with their sons and daughters when they start driving about what to do, how to comply. African Americans are the most complying people when it comes to law enforcement because we don't hate the police, we fear the police. And so we're the least that's gonna try to do something crazy. Many times they're running because they're afraid, not because they've committed a crime. They're afraid of what might happen to them, just like you saw Tyree Nichols. He was running because he was afraid.
And that's still the question a lot of people ask. Well, why did he run?
I mean, it's fight or flight. And he wasn't trying to fight him. He was leaving. He was fearful. I mean, and that's what we have to deal with. It's, again, the fear of police that has been ingrained in this country for African Americans for over 200 years. From the slave hunters, you name it, they've always feared authority.
The discussion and the debate and everything else that transpired after George Floyd's murder, and looking at what happened just a couple of weeks ago with Tyree, the atmosphere seems to be different. And there's what appears to be complicating the deep anguish that a lot of the community is feeling is that the 5 officers charged in Tyree's murders are black. And the point has been made that it's really not about personal racism. It's really about the system. It's really about the entrenched culture in the police department, regardless of race. Is that how you see it?
Not necessarily. I do believe there is a culture that definitely needs to be changed. And whether you're black, Hispanic, white, Asian, you're indoctrinated into that culture of being authoritative and abusive to certain segments of the community. But I venture to say I saw the response in the media as well as newscasters are how appalled they were regarding these 5 officers. And I didn't see it at the same level when you came to George Floyd, to the Rodney King beating, to the Eric Gardners. They seemed to be a lot more free of expressing their concerns, of disgust, and just outright outrage at the behavior of these officers. And I say, why don't we see it when you see white officers doing the same thing?
Well, there is, in fact, some of the attitude that, well, because it was black police officers, that the reaction has not been as strong with protests and everything else that changed our world 3 years ago with George Floyd's death. Do you think that that argument makes sense?
No, I don't. Abuse is abuse regardless.
Right.
But, you know, I think what has tempered the response is the immediate firing of these officers. And again, you can make the comparison that white officers are not fired in the same fashion, in the same timely manner as these African Americans were. But the fact that they were the justice that African Americans have asked for all the time, when you see it right in front of your eyes, at least Memphis responded in a timely manner and said, these guys are not worthy of wearing that uniform and wearing that badge. So that's what African Americans want to see, and with all departments, when you see something as blatant as what we saw.
Well, even the police unions have said that they were shocked at what happened to Tyree that night from their fellow officers. Do you really think that the country needs, I mean, we keep talking about a whole overhaul of policing, and this seems to reaffirm that as much as anything else. Do you agree?
Policing in this country has to be overhauled. People need to understand from a historical standpoint, the growth of urban police was direct correlation with African Americans being freed in 1865 and their migration to urban areas, be it Chicago, Detroit, New York, wherever, and you saw a direct growth of policing. Not an increase in crime, but a growth in policing because it was another way of controlling us. And even looking at some of the laws that are on the books, from trespassing to loitering, all those were not put on the books until African Americans were free from slavery. So we need to have it, look at it from a historical standpoint. Even Dr. Weber's bill a couple of years ago, use of deadly force. Deadly force was not implemented in California until 1872. Mm-hmm. What was different between 1850, when the state was founded, and 1872? Black folks were now free. So policing does need to be reformed. It has to be reformed. We have to go back to the Mayberry RFD's days of the Andy Griffins walking down the street and everybody knows their name. That's what it used to be, the beat cop that everybody knows their name. Now they drive down the street with their glasses on, looking straight ahead, and don't know anybody in the community. And so that's what we're seeing, reimagining police. What we see in African-American communities is not crime suppression, but community oppression. And we want crime suppression just like everybody else, but we get community oppression. And we have the worst of the worst assigned to those communities of color, or those poor communities, all the time.
You authored a bill, SB 2, in 2021, which has been called the strongest police reform bill in the last decade, which created the first statewide process to decertify officers who abuse the public trust and engage in serious misconduct. Obviously, in the wake of the George Floyd murder, what's the response been?
We can't, it's too early to measure the success, because it doesn't really go into full effect till this year. But hopefully we've seen the ripple effects across the country. I've been reached by members of Congress who've asked me to possibly testify if they reintroduce the George Floyd Act. Karen Bass, who's now the mayor, was very complimentary and seeing how could she work with me, because she was the original author of the George Floyd Police Reform Act that she couldn't get out of her own house. So it has got national attention, but attention in and of itself is not enough. We have to have real implementation. We have to have real change. And right now, we're still fighting Post here in California, who still is trying to water down that which is in this bill, and continue with roadblocks to say, oh, this can't be implemented, or it's going to ruin policing. No, it will improve policing.
You talked about Karen Bass as a former Congress member, now mayor. Washington is not doing anything. Part of the concern has been, they say, that, well, with gun violence being so strict, the last thing we want to do is start putting pressure on law enforcement across the country.
Gun violence is only because we're the freest country in the world to allow so many guns, especially guns of mass destruction, assault weapons, to be in the hands of everyday people when there's no need to have this type of firearms in regular communities. This is military type, war type equipment. So that is part of the reason why. And even police are being outgunned on the streets because of some of the firepower that has been made available. We need to have gun reform, which we've been trying to do here in California for the longest, but you just saw what Florida has just did. So you don't even need a concealed carry anymore. You can walk into a church with a gun. You can walk into a preschool with a gun. Makes absolutely no sense. So we need gun reform, but as well as police reform. And again, we just do a better job at recruiting. And that's really the core, too, of recruiting people from the community. But right now, police have such a bad rap, many people don't want to be police officers anymore.
Tyree was killed in a traffic stop, and policy experts are saying that the way to root out racial bias in policing is to ban certain types of these minor or technical traffic stops altogether, like the one that led to his death. You've authored a bill this year, SB 50, that addresses that here in California. Give us some details.
Yeah, that's SB 50, the pretextual stops. And we have seen, data has shown time and time, DOJ and RIPA have come back with reports that says that African Americans and Latinos are 3 to 4 times more likely to be stopped for minor violations that lead to many times not only arrests but tragic endings. So we're trying to say, if your tail light's not working, give them a nod. If your registration is no more than 6 months expired, you can mail them a ticket, say, bring your registration up. If your headlight's not working, stopping someone like Dante Wright because he had an air freshener hanging over his rearview mirror and winds up losing his life over that. We're trying to avoid that. Not only does it make the community safe, but it makes the officer safer as well, because it's totally unnecessary, some of these stops that lead to real tragic endings that are avoidable.
This is your second try with this form of legislation. You tried last year police unions, law enforcement came at you, didn't even get a vote on either one of the floors. Luckily, you have these stats that are coming out talking about the legitimacy of changing the process and the policy for these stops. You think that's going to mean more luck for you this year?
I hope so, and I hope my colleagues will really show some real profiles and courage and understand that this is necessary reform if we're really talking about. Again, if this is about making communities safer, why don't we see the same level of violent interaction in all communities? And you don't. So obviously this is biased. This is unnecessary. I can't remember the last time I saw a white person stopped and sitting on a curb. But I drive by still to this day, African Americans and Latinos pulled out of their cars. I was working out a couple months ago, and his young brother was sitting on the curb. And I literally stopped while I was doing my workout. And I said, "What's going on?" He said, "I'm getting a ticket." And I said, "You have to sit on the curb to get a ticket?" And it was LA County Sheriff's. Pulled him out of his car, making him sit on the curb while he gets a ticket. I don't see that happening to any other race other than black and brown people.
It's happened to you.
It has happened to me. It has happened to me. I was stopped 3 years ago leaving a friend's home. My headlight on my car was not working. It's just a short. It blink in and out. It might work, might not. And they said, "I'm stopping you for your headlight not working." I said, "Fine." I said, "This is short." I explained the situation. I said, "If you tap on it, it'll probably come on." "Well, do you mind getting out of the car and taking a field sobriety test?" I says, "Help me understand. You stopped me for my headlight. You didn't say for reckless driving or weaving or any of that stuff. And how does that lead to having to do a field sobriety test?" "Well, that's how we catch many DUIs late at night." I'm like, "But I haven't been drinking." And I passed it with flying colors, but still, a non-working headlight leads to me being subjected to a field sobriety test. Somebody might not have been as calm as I was and might have reacted in the wrong way. And again, could have led to a tragic outcome simply because of a headlight.
Yeah, I was thinking, boy, I could see how they could all of a sudden be labeling you as difficult with you pushing back and arguing with them about the uselessness of the stop.
Exactly. And I questioned it. And I'm like, "Well, why are you doing this?" And finally they looked at my license plate. "Well, what does that A stand for?" I says, "It's assembly. It's my assembly plate." And
Wow.
I'm like, "All right. What do you guys do?" Really? They asked, "What does an assembly person do?"
Wow.
I said, "We make the laws here in the state of California."
Oh, my God.
Really?
Jeez.
I mean, one of the things that we've been talking about is a higher threshold of education. I mean, all you need to do is have a high school diploma to be able to take someone's life. You entrust and empower law enforcement with a whole lot of authority, and many times with people with just a high school diploma. I'm not knocking that, but I think to have a better understanding of human nature and interaction, you need to have a little bit more education.
The San Francisco Police Commission is also considering adopting these type of standards for these traffic stops. Do you think that will give you extra ammunition, if you will, for passage here at the state level?
Let's hope so, but the city of LA's already implemented similar practices, Berkeley and Pittsburgh, so I'm hoping they follow suit and see what these cities have already chosen to do. Again, it's going to make everybody safer, not just the general public, but law enforcement as well.
Our conversations with you are always fruitful. A lot of things to talk about here. Reparations, that's another topic I want to talk about. We've all been following the results of the various meetings of the Reparations Task Force that you've had over the last year or so, as you are a member of it, a legislative appointee member, as it continues discussion about possible reparations to compensate for slavery and racism. Tell us where the task force is now, everything that's been proposed, and the debate, what's come down to over monetary and non-monetary reparations. Some who have said the non-monetary is just as important as anything monetary that could be come up with.
Everything's important right now. If we can get any kind of win for those descendants of chattel slavery here in California, I think we should see it as a victory. I mean, our biggest challenge is some people want monetary compensation and monetary only. And, and it's all or nothing for some folks. And it's just like anything, you have to find that middle ground, that compromise, and that's what we're trying to work at, because it's not enough resources to come anywhere near addressing the harm that has been inflicted on African Americans, not only in California, but across this country. So we're feathering that out and trying to put meat on the bones as to what this will look like. I mean, we have a whole lot of options and suggestions. I mean, the interim report came out last June that listed all the harms, and I mean, they were too lengthy to go through right now. I mean, it was 500 pages, and that probably was the Reader's Digest version of all what we could have put in there. So we're working at breakneck speed, and hopefully we'll have a final report in July that can be implemented. But that's when I want to be mindful and cautious that we have to come up with a final product that can truly be acted upon, and it can't be just aspirational and its intent. So.
Well, that's a good point. I've heard that the task force is trying to achieve that balance between aspirational and inspirational at the same time, giving something for people to have hope in as this moves forward. Do you think that you're achieving that balance?
I don't know if we're achieving it, but that's our goal and objective, and so we're working at it. I mean, it's a difficult discussion. I mean, it's a difficult discussion for not only the members of the task force, but the community at large. And I'm still hearing from far too many of the community that says, I don't know what you guys are doing. It's a factor of getting the word out and publicity and publicizing all the work that we're doing, but it's a lot of moving parts here. So we have our challenges, and we're working at breakneck speed, but hopefully we'll come up with something that can be implemented and can make people.
Well, San Francisco is proposing this. I think the figure I'd read was like $5 million per person for reparations, which is incredible. Sacramento is even considering it. Mayor Steinberg several years ago proposed this. It hasn't come before the city council yet. So cities, in addition to what's being done at the state, are also looking at this at a local level.
And that's encouraging. I mean, even Florida just had something in Rosewood awarding money to those folks who had their communities totally decimated, similar to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I'm encouraged by what I see on the local government, but California really has to wrap our arms around this and get it right so we can be the blueprint and the model for the rest of the nation, because not until the federal government really takes this on will we really have true reparations and true atonement. And
it's reminding people, as you and your colleagues in the Black Caucus have fought for, especially the last year or so, what's currently in our state constitution, Article 1, allowing for slavery. Here we are in 2023. The fight and the effort that you've made to change that has, I won't say it's fallen on deaf ears, that's probably not fair, but obviously that simple change is difficult.
I don't know if it's fallen on deaf ears, but it's fallen on obstructionists who feel there's no need to make this change. And it's very disappointing when you see something clearly spelling out and slavery in a state that claimed they didn't have slavery. Why would you need that still in our Constitution in 2023? So hopefully we can bring our colleagues around to understanding that this is a harm that's still being inflicted. Again, the majority of people incarcerated are Black and brown people.
Yes.
And even though we make up less than 10% of the state's population, we make up almost 40% of the prison population. So the growth of prisons, just like I stated earlier about growth of law enforcement, was a direct result of African Americans being free. So we have to understand the ties to our penal system and African Americans as well.
Speaking of reparations, maybe a different kind of reparation, many communities have been celebrating your legislation in 2021, signed into law, that gave back prime real estate in Manhattan Beach to the descendants of the Black couple who lost it in a racist government seizure a century ago. That's Bruce's Beach. And the supporters, when this all happened, a big signing ceremony, handing over the deed, everybody was electrified. Understandably, this is justice. But now the descendants who got the deed to the property in that ceremony have decided that they're going to sell the property back to Los Angeles County for $20 million. And there have been a lot of supporters who were thrilled by this scenario and by the bill who are feeling a little bit let down, disappointed that it's a blow to the reparations movement. But I've also seen the argument that, hey, that's the whole idea. They own it. They have the right to sell it if they want to. Obviously, as the author of the bill, I assume your thinking is they have a right to do what they want with it because it's their property.
From day one, we've said whatever the end result of this property is once the Bruces have, that's their decision. But people need to understand, and it goes, again, along the racial tension that still exists, not only in Manhattan Beach, but around this country. That property had no value to no one other than the county of Los Angeles under its current zoning. And as sure as I sit here, the city of Manhattan Beach was not going to rezone that property to allow them to even build like condominiums that's on both sides, townhouses that sell for millions of dollars. They weren't going to rezone their property to let them do that. They surely wasn't going to rezone it to allow them to put what their great-grandparents had there, a resort, a bathhouse, a restaurant, anything of that sort, no entertainment. So it had no real economic value other than to sell it back to the county of Los Angeles. So I don't blame the family. I talked to Anthony Bruce before he made the decision, and I said, hey, I totally support your actions because, again, the county at any time could have said, hey, we don't want to be a tenant anymore. We're going to walk away. We'll build our own lifeguard training station down the road, and that property would be absolutely worthless to them under the current zoning. And even if they got the city of Manhattan Beach to rezone it, they still had to deal with the Coastal Commission. So I says, hey, why not make hay while the sun's shining? So I don't blame them for selling it.
Are you telling the community, encouraging the community that feels that, can explaining to them that this is just as much part of the healing and social justice as the handing over the deed was?
Very much so. I was at a homeowners meeting this past Thursday, and once I explained it, people says, I feel much better. Now I understand. Thank you, Steve. I didn't understand it. Now I understand. Because part of their challenge was trying to get it rezoned to do something. And the family, that would have taken lawyers. The family's not wealthy, you know. Yes, they're going to inherit this money, but they're not wealthy people. So to be able to fight City Hall or fight the Coastal Commission, that can be years and millions of dollars. So this was the smartest, most economical path for them. I might have leased it out to the county for another 2 years because they had the 2-year option and taken a little less than $500,000 a year for the next 2 years just to add a little bit more revenue in my pocket. But I don't blame them for selling it. And this is part of the healing process. Whether they want to sell it or keep it, this is their decision.
You mentioned things going on across the country, and one of the things I wanted to get your perspective on, the reaction to the College Board this last week as we speak, caving to pressure and criticism from Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida and essentially neutering the official AP course curriculum for African American studies, purging the names of black writers and scholars associated with critical race theory and black feminism, Black Lives Matters representatives, which had angered the governor and conservative critics. This is just another example of the chipping away at our knowledge and our learning process of the history of this country. I can assume what your reaction is, but I want to hear it.
It was one of the most cowardly acts you could do. But it's an African proverb that states, until the hunt is told by the lion, the tail will always favor the hunter. And right now, we're having a white perspective on American history. And we need to hear from the lion. We need to hear from the African American people. We need to teach this history. And we have whitewashed this country from day one. I mean, let's talk about Peter Burnett, the first governor of the state that owned slaves, who all but wanted to annihilate and eradicate African Americans from the state, but it was ruled in the Constitution. He was saying blacks were not allowed in California. Let's talk about the founding fathers of this country. All were slave owners. Let's talk about that. Let's tell that history. But they don't want to tell that history. They want to act like these were pious individuals who were holier than thou, but many of them were racist. They were slave owners. So let's tell that history. But let's also tell the rich contributions of African Americans. I mean, the George Washington Carver, who came up with crop rotation in order to put nutrients back into the soil. He was the first real environmentalist. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And when you talk about all the inventions and innovations, especially around labor, who was doing the labor for 400 years in this country? It were African Americans. And most of those devices were invented by them, but it was white folks who stole the credit and got the patents. And like Eli Whitney and the cotton gin, he didn't invent no cotton gin. He wasn't picking no cotton. So that's why we need to tell the story of the rich contributions that African Americans have made in science, in medicine, in the environment, in technology, in space. Like I say, Hidden Figures, the three African American women who were responsible for that space launch and coming back.
And we didn't find out about that till just the last decade.
A movie, exactly. Not only Hidden Figures, but hidden history. And so I'm appalled by it. I think we all should be outraged by it, because if we can tell you about George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, we should be able to tell you about all the rich contributions African Americans have made in this country as well.
Indeed. Final thoughts here. Bringing you back to 2023. Being a Los Angeles politician, African-American politician in 2023. There have been some recent conversations and controversies, as you know, at the local level in Los Angeles that have brought into sharp focus some of the divides that still exist between the communities of color and the representational power that they deserve and hold on their respective communities, and the challenges of trying to partner together on behalf of those communities. And how are those controversies affecting or strengthening the resolve of Black leaders to hold on to their communities, represent their communities, but also work in tandem with other communities of color? We're all in this together. Let's work together on behalf of our communities.
Well, what you heard was truly a direct attempt at disenfranchising African Americans. Now, I don't fault them for seeing how do we preserve that which we have, but at the cost of other folks. I mean, African Americans have those discussions every 10 years when we draw the lines and saying, okay, how do we maintain these seats? But if people understand here in California, even in LA, there are no more African American districts. There's 12 legislators here in California. Not a single one has a majority African American district. It's through those coalitions. And that's what they were trying to erode, those coalitions that existed. And if people knew the history even in L.A., Ed Roybal, the first Latino elected to L.A. City Council in 1949, was because of those coalitions of Japanese, African Americans, and Latinos that afforded him that opportunity. And that same coalition, even though without a majority, got Gil Lindsay elected in 1960 as the first African-American city councilman. That's what they were trying to disrupt, those coalitions. There's no African-American districts, majority African-American districts, be it on the city council or in the state legislature. So it's through those coalitions that we have built, and that's what was most hurtful, that they were eroding all that long work that we have done, to work across racial lines, party lines, community lines as well, to get folks elected.
Did you have those coalitions behind you when you were elected as council member?
I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that. I mean, I represent the most diverse Senate district in the state of California.
Yes.
Some say less than 20% is African American. I also, like I say, was elected in Gardena City Council, where African Americans weren't the majority then, still aren't the majority now, but we were able to build coalitions with Japanese, whites, Latinos, and get elected. And that's what we've done since the beginning of time. We have worked across lines, and it's so troubling that we can have whites or non-African Americans, I should say, represent us for hundreds of years, and nobody has any problem with that. But then when you have blacks saying, oh, I want to run for this, this is not a majority black district. No, if we build those coalitions, we can represent anywhere in this country.
And do you think that this whole scenario, all the controversy of the last few months, is a wake-up call that the work still needs to be done, that these coalitions still need to be maintained and kept healthy?
Without a doubt, the work still needs to be done, and I'm hoping people are paying attention to what happened in L.A. because it's happening all across this country. You know, it just happened, they were caught on tape. But we should be maintaining these coalitions because it's through these real non-racial lines that we've been able to make much of the success that we've made here in the state and in this country.
Just a final thought for you. I mentioned at the start Rhiannon Giddens, the multiracial bluegrass and gospel singer. She's amazing. She's just a beautiful voice. She released a song back in 2015 on an album of the same title called Tomorrow Is My Turn. And it was originally written as a theme to a 1962 movie about World War II prisoners from France. But then Nina Simone, back in the 60s, who I'm sure you've heard of, turned it into just this haunting, beautiful song. And then Rhiannon Giddens did it too, reclaiming it as this fierce expression of determination and rage and a declaration of resilience and a political spark, which feels very appropriate for this moment. I'll throw some lyrics at you, see what you think. Though some may reach for the stars, others will end behind bars. What the future has in store, no one ever knows. Yet we would all like the right to find the key to success, that elusive ray of light that will lead to happiness. Tomorrow is my turn, no more doubts, no more fears. When my luck is returning, all these years I've been learning to save fingers from burning, to make life worth the living, for it's my life I'm living and my only concern, and tomorrow is my turn. Now, I know this is the first time you perhaps have heard these, but we'll acquaint you with that song. But what do you think of that just in the context of everything we've been talking about in 2023?
I think it sums it up. It's as relevant today as it was then, and more folks need to hear it. And not only are those beautiful lyrics that speak to the challenge that we face in this country, I mean, I'll even use Mickey Guyton, who's one of the most amazing country singers, and she gets less radio play than any other country singer right now. And why? Because of her race.
Right.
So,
she's an amazing artist.
Her song "Black Like Me." Listen to that too.
Yeah.
Those lyrics up. So no, those are poignant lyrics that speak the truth to where we find ourselves and the challenges that we still face every day here in this country.
Senator, thanks for speaking the truth with us. It's always good to have you. We always have this long list of things to talk about. Good luck with everything here with Black History Month and this year ahead, and hope we can do this again soon.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
State Senator Stephen Bradford of Gardena, representing California's 35th Senate District, the Vice Chair of the Legislative Black Caucus. And that is a wrap for this edition of Then There's California. We're a production of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus with technical assistance and production support from Martin Ashley, Bob Brulte, Brian Shadden, John Roman, Ann DeGrazia, Michelle Baker, McLeana Woods, Lisa Murphy, and the graphic artistry of Tim Davis. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. Thank you for listening to Then There's California.